I'm Vladimir Dutier.
And I'm Anne-Marie Green. Of course, as you can see, it's already a busy day. We're following the latest developments out of Israel and Gaza. And here's what we know at this hour. So President Biden is in Israel today. He's meeting with the country's prime minister and president. Earlier this morning, the president told Israeli officials, quote, "We will continue to have your back."
Meanwhile, an explosion hit a crowded hospital yesterday in Gaza City, killing hundreds of innocent people. Israel and Hamas are pointing the finger at each other. President Biden said the blast appears to have been caused by Palestinian fighters, not the Israeli military.
There's also a growing humanitarian crisis as thousands of people wait at the Rafah gate. They want to evacuate from Gaza into Egypt. For now, though, there is a plan underway to allow some Gazans with foreign passports to go out in exchange for letting foreign aid come in.
Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, where President Biden, as you just saw, met with Israeli community leaders and first responders. Earlier in the morning, as Anne-Marie referenced, he met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and spoke about yesterday's deadly strike on that hospital in Gaza. Listen.
I was deeply saddened and outraged by the explosion at the hospital in Gaza yesterday. And based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you.
President Biden also reaffirmed Israel's right to defend itself against Hamas and praised the Israeli people for their courage and their bravery. CBS News foreign correspondent Roxana Saberi is in Tel Aviv, and she is following the very latest for us. Roxana, we've seen the president meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu and also with first responders. What's next on his agenda?
Well, we are expecting them to hold a press conference here this afternoon after meeting with the Prime Minister and those first responders and members of families who have lost loved ones. He's also expected to speak with Arab leaders on his way home. He was supposed to be meeting with the leaders of Egypt, Jordan, and also the Palestinian Authority, President Mahmoud Abbas, but that meeting was canceled last night after that strike on the hospital in Gaza. Vlad and Anne-Marie.
So we know that Biden also met with Israel's war cabinet. What do we know about that meeting and what he may have learned?
Right. He did meet with the war cabinet earlier today. He did not elaborate on his thoughts on the hospital blast, which we heard him speaking about just at the top of your show. He did say that the U.S. continues to have Israel's back and will work with regional partners to prevent all tragedies to innocent civilians. He said the U.S. stands with Israel in freedom, the pursuit of justice and peace today, tomorrow, and always. He called the Hamas attack brutal, inhumane, and almost beyond belief. You know, he's trying to achieve a very tricky balance here. The line that he was walking here was always going to be fragile, but after the attack after the blast at the hospital in Gaza last night, it became even more tenuous. There's growing outrage in this region about the humanitarian crisis, the deaths now totaling at least 3,300 according to Gaza's health ministry in Gaza. That something needs to be done to help the civilians in Gaza. At the same time, President Biden is trying to voice support for this key ally of the United States in the Middle East, Israel. So he's under a lot of pressure from all sides. Vlad and Anne-Marie.
We should say earlier this morning, Israel's military provided what they say was proof that the explosion at the hospital was not because of them, but was because of another group, Islamic Jihad, which is aligned with Hamas. Hamas is obviously saying something different. They're saying that Israel is behind this, and you know, no surprise there that the two groups are pointing fingers at each other.
Exactly. We have not seen conclusive evidence by either side to prove who was actually behind this blast. As you mentioned, Israel says that it has evidence. It pointed out, it says it has drone footage showing that there was no crater produced by the blast, which would have been proof of Israeli ordnance exploding at that hospital. They said there is no such evidence, and they claim that it was a failed rocket launch by the Palestinian group Islamic Jihad, which is the second largest armed group in Gaza. And of course, Hamas is saying, no, it was Israel. And we've also seen some Arab leaders in this region also blaming Israel.
Yeah, and Roxana, obviously the fog of war affects journalists as well. It's incredibly difficult at times when reports come out, you hear from the people in Gaza that say one thing, and then the Israeli military says something else, as you say.
And thus far, I don't think Hamas has provided any proof to support
exactly
what
right.
they're
exactly
saying.
right. And so, but that language and the words that the Israelis use and the words that the people in Gaza use have serious repercussions, because now President Biden is no longer meeting, at least publicly, with the King of Jordan, with the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, and with Egypt's President al-Sisi. So do you know, are you aware if the president will have sidebar conversations? We know the Secretary of State has been in the region jetting around to talk to those leaders, but perhaps even phone calls with those leaders, even if it's not in front of cameras.
Yes, actually, President Biden told journalists on Air Force One on his way here to Tel Aviv today that he did plan to speak with those Arabs by phone after meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today and on his own way home. It is a setback that for efforts to try to de-escalate the crisis here, especially the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, that he couldn't meet with those Arab leaders. But we were told, CBS News was told last night, that it was a mutual decision to cancel that meeting, particularly after the leaders of Jordan and also the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas decided to call for 3 days of mourning after the strike on that hospital. There were also protests last night in this region, so you can imagine these leaders are coming under growing pressure by their own populations to put pressure on the U.S. and to try to also reach some kind of solution to try to address the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
All right, Roxana, thank you. So for more on the president's trip to Israel, I want to bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, you know, we've seen the president talk now several times in front of cameras. What did the president say at the end of his meeting with first responders and victims' families there? Somebody threw out a few questions were thrown out, and you can kind of hear what he was saying.
It speaks to what you guys were just talking about to Roxana. He was asked how he was able to draw conclusions that, quote, the other team was responsible for that hospital blast. Earlier this morning, in his first on-camera meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister, he mentioned that he had reviewed information that suggested that the other team had caused it. So we've been inquiring about that. Reporters were able to quickly ask him. He says, the data I was shown by my Defense Department, unquote, is what gives him confidence that it was not Israel that caused that hospital explosion. This, of course, remains a big point of dispute between the various sides in this conflict, but that gives us a little more sense of how the president was learning about this on his way there to Tel Aviv today for these meetings with the Israeli Prime Minister and his war cabinet, and now these survivors and first responders. A real interesting mix of people there that he met with, very clearly and calmly conveying some really horrific stories of what's transpired in recent days. But the president doing what he's been known to do in these situations, meeting with people directly affected by the crisis at hand, and then recounting to them, you know, some of his own experiences in Israel, his meetings in the late 70s with then Prime Minister Golda Meir, and his own personal suffering to sort of pass along his understanding in hopes that they are able to rebound from this. But the meetings that he has had are set to wrap up here in the next few hours, and then he'll make his way back here, of course, with no plans now to go to Jordan, where he was set to meet with Arab leaders.
And yet, Ed, as important as those meetings with the first responders and people that were directly affected by the massacre some 11 days ago, there are concrete decisions that need to be made, specifically as it relates to humanitarian care for people in Gaza and those that are in the south of Gaza at that Rafah gate, the border with Egypt. So will the president, I mean, is part of the agenda at the very least, even if they're not public meetings with some of these Arab leaders, will he be able to get on Air Force One and perhaps share with the American people that he was able to accomplish something other than just a symbolic gesture of being in Israel?
That remains to be seen. I mean, he's set to speak a little later this morning about all of this, and then he's set to talk on the phone, at least, with the Egyptian and Palestinian Authority leadership on his flight back. And so after all that, we may get a better sense of what more might be done. There are also questions about what he learned today about what Israel may be planning to do, and whether it truly keeps to his concerns that civilians not be caught up in this conflict. It was notable that the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said in one of his earlier public statements alongside the president that this war is going to be different. It's going to take a while, but we will account for civilians who may be in harm's way. That's one of the first times he's so explicitly said that. But that's only after about 10 days now of concern expressed by the president and ensuring that that is taken into account.
Of course, there are a number of ways to put pressure on Hamas, and the U.S. is imposing sanctions now on Hamas leaders, certain individuals. What can you tell us about that?
So they are targeting 10, I'm just reading this from notes that have come in the last little bit, 10 Hamas members, operatives, and financial facilitators, not only in Gaza, but also in Sudan, Turkey, Algeria, and Qatar. Remember, this is an organization that isn't just based in Gaza, but is an entity that operates in various ways in different places. The political leadership, for example, is in Qatar. So, you know, we saw this ahead of the Ukrainian-Russian war. We're now seeing it here, that one of the weapons the United States, of course, can use is its economic firepower. And so the Treasury Department now squeezing Hamas leadership in a financial way, a sign of how coordinated and how far-reaching the U.S. response will be absent military action.
All right, Ed O'Keefe for us at the White House. Ed, we'll check back in with you certainly throughout the course of the day as we learn more from the president's trip. Thank you.